Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining this morning. I really appreciate the fact that you're here and taking the time to talk with us about developing beyond sport, athlete development. You are the second panel for this session. And so we're going to be talking about how can coaches have a proactive role in supporting an end of career for athletes. So we're going to be starting with a quick intro of each one of you, quick minute intro. Janice, if you would like to get started, and then we'll dive into the discussion.
Okay, great. So I think it's probably good that I unmute myself first. So hello, everyone. Hi, Miriam. It's so great to be a part of this panel this afternoon. I'll make mine short. I'm the president and CEO of Hillyard Solutions. We're an educational and sports consultancy down in Houston, Texas, and really focus on helping professionals help athletes succeed. And that is at all levels, whether it's at the high school level, the college, or the professional level. Started Hilliard Solutions about 5 years ago when I transitioned from the NBA, where I spent the last 15 years in player development and as vice president working with the continuing education, career development, and transition programs for athletes on all teams. Also spent some time in college athletics, a few years, and then before that at the high school level. But our focus is on career services, also helping women to enter into this field of athlete development and grow and develop professionally, as well as programming and curriculum design that we do and consulting. I'm excited to be a part of the summit today, so thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure and honor to have you, Janice. Helen, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'd like Janice, I'm honored to be on this panel. I appreciate, Miriam, that you asked me to do this. I am a former college coach, coached all over the country, or was an administrator at Division I, II, and III levels. So I have a pretty good understanding of the nuances of all those. I now have a company where I work with coaches on career and professional development so that they understand the keys to success for running successful programs off the court and off the field, the things that they need to learn and the skills they need to acquire or enhance. So I do that. My company, HMW Sports, we speak with coaches individually. We work with coaching staffs and also speak with athletic teams. I'm also a television analyst for basketball, so I can keep my hand in it and fulfill my basketball Jones. So try to stay around the sport, but mostly very much involved in making sure that the athletes have a quality experience during their collegiate career. And I think that comes with the coaches becoming more educated and, consistent and intentional about the things that they do for their athletes.
Thank you, Helen. Duncan, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Again, pleasure to be here, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak with your group. So glad to be here. My background, very simply, was founded Game Change Athlete Development Services and Consultancy. We work with major professional sports organizations and athletes, helping them put their athletes in the best position to succeed on and off the playing surface. Also the executive director and helped establish PADS, which is the Professional Association of Athlete Development Specialists, which is a mouthful, but it is it's an umbrella organization of major professional sports organizations, elite amateur sport organizations across North America and beyond, which is focused on helping assist those professionals who work with athletes on a day in, day out basis and help optimize their resources and skill set to be successful in this field of athlete development. And then beyond that, once upon a time, I was a D1 hockey coach. So have a little bit of an insight into this world. So again, great to be here and thanks for having me on your panel.
Thank you, and cannot say enough about PADS and all the services and resources that they have. Lee, you're going next.
Hey, Miriam. Hey, the rest of you. I'm going to have to be really careful not to try and talk about the NBA basketball the entire time now that I know the other guests on this. I'm a huge NBA fan. I just want to talk about how great Steph is. My background is track sprint cycling. So I came to it a little bit different to most people. I had a professional career in real estate first. but I'd always raced myself. And then I got invited into coaching, really enjoyed it, started to do well. Sat there one day, trackside watching a race thinking, I don't want to be a real estate agent anymore. Quit my business, went into a much less lucrative profession to start with of elite coaching. Ended up running the National Track Sprint Elite Development Program for USA Cycling. And I've now pivoted again to leadership coaching, executive coaching, men's groups, and mentoring and coaching sports coaches. And I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Lee. And what a fantastic panel and quite a depth of experiences and knowledge. I'm going to jump in with this first question, and it's really the can and how sports coaches. We're really trying to focus on the impact of the coaches on the athletes when we're talking about the end of career. And so can and how sport coaches encourage athletes to think about their life after sport, but also think about life outside of sport or beyond sport, like you put it, Duncan. And I guess I can start this question with you. In your work, how do we encourage the coaches to help athletes outside of sport or develop beyond sport? You're muted.
I got to hit the mute button. There we go. Well, it's only been 2 years on Zoom, sooner or later, right? So, I mean, to your question, I think the easy answer is that coaches need to view athlete development and having athletes prepare for a life beyond sport as a performance issue. And I think that's the biggest transition that needs to be made from a mindset perspective, particularly at the professional level, is that in order for an athlete to be successful, they can't be completely focused on sport all the time. It's counterintuitive. It doesn't lead to success. So I think from a coaching perspective, the number one mind shift is by helping your athletes be open to opportunities and interests beyond the game, you're going to help them perform better. So from my perspective, that's the easiest case you can make to a coach, is that if you want your athletes to be optimal performers, have them look outside the game, have them take the blinders off so they can have a better feel for what's out there beyond just the sport. And they're going to bring that enthusiasm, I guess, if you want to call it that, back to their sport, and they'll be able to play in a freer way. So that's my very simple answer to that probably very complex question.
And I think that's what we try to put forward always in the athlete development spaces. If you develop the whole person, the whole athlete beyond sport, you will have a better performance simply by having better well-being, better emotional health. But is there any statistics or study that actually reinforce that message? I don't know, Janice, if you've come across anything that supports this.
Well, actually, my perspective to your question is that coaches should look at their athlete development from a personal development perspective. And from a personal development perspective, that means looking at the athletes from the very beginning, from the onset, at the life cycle of the athlete, from the time that he or she is recruited to play a sport, whether it's at the college level, the professional level, or at the high school level. There is a life cycle that athletes go through. And from a personal development perspective, there are many facets of an individual's life, and sport and performance is one of those. And I know, Miriam, we've talked about a little bit, the model that we operate under at Hillyard Solutions is a holistic model that looks at all of the elements of an athlete's life, personally, professionally, and all the different pieces. And the mental health and performance is one perspective. So there's an education, there are things that impact them socially that are going on in the world. There's an economic impact, whether they're dealing with scholarships or whether at the professional level. And so all of these things are transpiring in the life of the athlete at the same time. And so having an understanding of how all of these components actually work together is what I've found successful in terms of working with coaches and administrators and understanding that perspective and how all these things work together. So the example that I like to give is basketball, Lee. If you're a basketball coach, you're not preparing your your player just to go into competition, just strengthening her or his shooting skills, right? They have to have passing skills that work together. They have to be able to defend. They have to be able to read offenses and defenses. They have to be in good shape physically, mentally. All of those components come and work together for your athlete to be prepared to perform at his or her best. So I would say that encouraging us to think about comprehensively, and that begins again with recruiting, talking with our athletes about what's happening to them within their life cycle, as well as with their performance. And then that makes sense and hopefully does sort of promote their performance. And some of the performance guys or women on the call may have a better response to your question about performance, Miriam.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask Lee on that topic, because we still hear this culture of you've got to be 100% focused on your sport, you've got to be all in or out. Do you feel, Lee, that as a coach, you were able to help your athletes develop beyond sport and be more than an athlete? You're muted.
Oh, so used to leading things and not muting myself. Duncan, Phil, yeah. Most of the athletes that I work with were development athletes. So they were in school, they're in college, university, and it's a hard balance. You know, I feel for them, and I'm always so impressed by how they were able to balance these things. I do feel that there's a point, if you have the program for it, where you can fully commit to the sport, but then what are you doing for your emotional health outside of that? You know, I'll just talk about my sport, track sprint cycling. It's really short, hard training sessions with a lot of rest in between so that you can do another really short, hard training session. What are you going to do in those rest periods? Are you going to do something that captivates you, emotionally excites you, and gives you opportunities for outside the sport? Or are you just going to sit on your butt and watch Netflix? And I think the athlete gets to decide that, but us as coaches, we can offer to them, look at yourself as a holistic human being. The athletes I work with that had other interests outside of their sport seem to be able to accept the grittier parts of their sports easier. They seem to be able to accept the challenges. They seem to be able to cope with injuries better because their life wasn't just track sprint cycling. Their life was, as Janice said so eloquently, holistically whole. And then you're offering them all of these opportunities to have other avenues that they can go into beside their sport while they're still doing it. And it's, you know, reading a book on emotional health or reading a sci-fi book just to give yourself something different to think about isn't going to affect your physical performance.
Great. And Helen, is this something you have observed while coaching athlete as well? This ability to find something else beyond sport that can help them perform better on and off the field?
Yeah, I think, you know, coaches have a unique platform in terms of being able to help athletes understand, you know, life after sport. You have an opportunity during your coaching to teach them life skills and to take real-time situations and help them understand you know, what the transferable skills are going to be, because the same skills that you need to be successful out in the quote unquote real world are the skills you need to be successful on the court or the field. And so consistently making that connection between the two is really important, and reinforcing that. And just, I love the term holistic, because in my view, that's how you should approach coaching anyway, is looking at the whole athlete. And I do think that you know, you want to keep the main thing, so to speak. But as Lee says, they're much happier if they're able to explore things that they love outside of the sport. And you have a unique opportunity with your platform to help them do that.
I want to turn it to Duncan for a minute. We talked about, and Janice brought this up, we talked about personal development, performance development. How can we bring, from a systemic point of view within organization, how can we bring those things closer together or approach them from a more global perspective?
So
The
I'll start.
concept. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Doc.
Go ahead, Duncan. I said, I'll let Duncan go. I mean, again, it's about bringing all the pieces together. So traditionally, we have student athlete and athlete development defined in a lot of different ways. And they are, each aspect is singularly approached. So the financial education, there's somebody that does that. There's a sports performance person. There's someone who does that. There's the different aspects all around what we call development, and they are not coordinated nor communicated together. I think those of you that have worked either at the professional level or have coached realize that everything is departmentalized, but nothing is together and looked at, again, holistically from a big picture. So I would suggest that one way to begin is to look at all of the components of what's happening for the athlete, to the athlete, from an educational perspective, on the field, off the field, and to coordinate those efforts so that athletes can see the connection between what the mental health and performance person does, what the education person does with life skills. And I think that segmentation, Miriam, is one of the biggest problems that I see at all levels. And so you cannot look at, for example, NIL at the college level, and that's what's very popular now, right? Name, image, and likeness. You cannot look at NIL separately. It impacts every part of a student athlete's life, the scholarship part of it, the media part of it, you know, the opportunity to get paid for your likeness, the stress that comes with it, the social media, all of those things are happening at the same time, but they're being addressed individually. So one approach is, you know, looking at structurally, I think, how these services are put together and how they are collaborated and interrelated. Duncan, I cut you off.
No, not at all, Doc. Not at all. I know Doc Hilliard, and she's a legend in the industry, so you can cut me off anytime, Doc. No, I think the only thing I would add to that, and I think is kind of playing off what Dr. Hilliard is saying, is at the end of the day, in order to kind of make this work, you need data, you need research. And I think one of the questions you sort of asked there offhand, Miriam, is, you know, what's the data that's out there? Well, there's data out of the UK and Australia, which basically speaks to the fact that having your athletes engage and participate in athlete development or player welfare related services results in longer careers, better health, more games played, better performance. Research that we have internally that we've done with major professional athletes, it's very clear that, you know, if people are engaged beyond their sport, you're going to see, again, longer careers, more interests outside the game, less negative affectation from things that come from their sport because they have interests outside of it. So there's a range of value, but I think data and research, and I think what Doc Hilliard referred to in terms of the siloing, is absolutely on point. And I think that's one of the cool things about the athlete development world, is as this industry and athlete development world continues to grow, is that athlete development specialists are going to be able to place themselves at the hub of all of these different things, because the primary focus is how do we get this athlete to perform at peak? And I think that's the other thing, is you can never not acknowledge how critical performance and outcome is. But that's where an athlete development specialist becomes that individual that can kind of oversee and help the athlete as well as the organization deal with these different silos to help optimize performance for the athlete. So merging that with data and research, and I think you can actually make a strong case to organizations to put themselves on the right foot to kind of merge all those different component pieces.
Yeah, and I obviously agree with you that it's very fragmented. It has been for a while. And even in the Olympic sport, which was more my side and Lee's side, there's a lot of fragmentation between the mental health professional, the athlete development person, the nutritionist, and these people don't necessarily always work together, and it's trying to figure out how do we make that happen. What I'd like to hear, Lee, again, from a coaching perspective, you probably have seen that fragmentation a little bit in the Olympic sport. And is there a way where the coach could be playing a more leading role in trying to bring everybody together and coordinate that effort of that holistic approach for the athlete?
That's how I see coaching. You know, you are the leader of that organization, and you've got to bring all of your resources together to maximize what the team, the athlete, and everybody gets out of the experience. I must say, as I was listening to Janice speak then, I had huge envy because I was doing all 6 of those jobs by myself. So, you know, Miriam will know this, an Olympic sport as opposed to professional sport here. I was the sports psychologist, I was the physiologist, I was the technical expert, I was the strength and conditioning coach, I was the emotional coach. So for me, I was taking on all of that, and I would have liked to have been able to have other people come in and support me. And I was reaching outside to friends and colleagues to do that, but we didn't have the finance in the organization to do that. But when you do, I see the role of the coach now as being more of a leader. And now where we have people that are specialized, so specialized in all these different environments, the coach, head coach brings everybody together, and it's like, right, how do we best work with each individual member of our team? And then what are we looking at as the ethos for the team? And I like getting the athletes to lead that too. I think the athletes should lead the ethos of the team. They should have a code of conduct that they write. I like them to get really involved in that process too. How do they want to be served by everybody best around them?
So I like Lee what you said about ethos, okay? Because, you know, I've just had the great fortune to work for and with, you know, I guess what I believe the greatest sports organization in the world, which is the NBA, and the model that actually is set and is clear. And I think that the successful sports organizations, teams, leagues, or whatever, they are successful because, and the NBA is a model, because they have paid attention to their athletes holistically. So when you look at the NBA in terms of the kinds of things that it has done to support its athletes and the women, you look at from the social justice perspective, from the mental health and wellness perspective, what they've done in the political space, the mental health and wellness, all of the areas, if you think about it, the organization has demonstrated a commitment and resources, both people and otherwise, to support these different elements. And in taking it even from a league perspective, you know, I also had the good fortune to work with some great teams like the San Antonio Spurs. And if you look at Greg Popovich and the makeup and the culture of that team, the kinds of things that he does, that organization does when they travel to away game, they're always paying attention to what's happening in the athlete's world. And I think when a coach demonstrates that, provides those opportunities, I mean, come on, let's face it, you know, athletes want to be treated in a holistic way. All we have to do is look at what's happening around us in sports today, right? You look at the transfer portal at the NCAA level, folks are leaving every day, right? They have a huge problem with the NCAA with the transfer. And why is that? You know, athletes are empowered now. we know they have the power, and hey, they're going to expect to be treated in a certain way. And from a coach's perspective, not only is it the right thing to do to care about your athlete as a whole person, it's the smart thing to do, because their success is directly related to your success as a coach.
I totally agree with you on the place of athlete now and their empowerment. I feel that it puts a lot more pressure on coaches in general. And I'm not necessarily talking about at the professional level and in some of the professional leagues, because there are we have more means and they have more resources to do a lot of different things. But I'm thinking more in college, in some of the lower Olympic sport that don't have as much budget, in high school. How do we support coaches to be able to help their athletes better? I feel like, and Helen, maybe you can contribute to that since you work with coaches as well. How do we provide more for coaches and educate them so that they can in turn provide a holistic approach to their athlete?
Well, I think one of the first things you need to do as a coach is just have that as a part of your philosophy. If you're going into it just to coach X's and O's, that you're not going to be able to accomplish that. So it starts with, having a holistic approach to your coaching and understanding, like I said before, there's so many skills that are transferable. But I also think, coaches, they sort of, it's changing now, but it used to be, we're just going to go in, we're going to practice, and we're going to play games. And there's so much more involved in running a successful program. And, that's one of the things that I try to help my clients understand is that, first of all, you have to be ever curious, and you always have to make sure that you are, you don't know what you don't know. So as Lee says, you're always trying in your downtime to learn and get better, and encouraging coaches who never think they have enough time to do that, how important it is to find that time. I tell coaches there's 138 hours in the week. And if you wrote down everything that you did, including just family, commute, goofing off, just relaxing or whatever, there's always at least a minimum of 3 hours during that week that you could use to make yourself better. And it's incumbent upon you as a coach to do that, because for me, the better the coach is, the better quality of experience the athlete has. And so being ever curious, and then explaining to coaches that, you need to encourage your athletes that it's okay to have a life outside of athletics, and that you understand that there are important things that are priorities for them that have nothing to do with athletics. And so encouraging them that it's okay to explore those things, because if those things are off kilter, it's always going to filter onto the court or onto the field. If things aren't balanced, if things aren't whole. And so I think for the coach, just having that, that philosophy going into it, where I want to help develop the whole person, but it starts with developing yourself in a holistic manner as well, because that filters down to how you impact the athletes that you coach.
Thank you, Helen. I love that you brought that back to the coaches. And if they're not developing holistically themselves, they can certainly not model that to their athletes as well. Lee, did you want to add something? This is right up your alley. Do you want to add something to the holistic development of the coaches?
I do. I was loving what Helen was saying. The hardest thing for me is helping coaches get those resources. So when I look at sports coaches and coaching, so much of the resource is put into physiology. It's put into, how can we, as Janice said, how can we shoot better? How can I put out more power on a bike? How can I eat better? And so little is put into how does the coach communicate with their athletes? Language is so important for the impact of how you're communicating with your athletes. You can share the same thing and say it in two completely different ways. So you can say, hey, don't be at the back of this race, or you can say, I'd like you to be in the front third of this race. Similar concept, but one you can't do. You can't do a negative. So you can't not be at the back of the race. That's very hard to actually action. So I think the way that we help coaches in the language that they use, the way that we support them emotionally, because again, most coaches at the top of the organization, as we were talking about earlier, they might have a performance director or an owner above them, but they definitely don't want to share their own fears with them, because that person pays them and that person might fire them. So what do we do to support coaches in their own emotional needs? They do really stressful jobs. The buck stops with them. If the athletes or the team aren't performing, they're going to get fired. Who steps in to stand side by side with the coaches, help them with their own stuff, help them separate their own ego and needs from those of the players and the teams, so that they can show up best for the players and the teams, instead of showing up from a place of their ego and fear of, you guys have got to perform so I don't lose my job. And if we're showing from that, then we want the players to do something for us rather than standing by the players and supporting them in what they're doing. And there is a lack there of that, I think, of people that can stand next to coaches and support them emotionally so that they can see what's going on, so they get reflection of how they coach, and just that level of support. I think there's a big gap there.
Miriam, and I just want to add to that, you know, there's, especially at the collegiate level, there's such an emphasis now on, you know, student athlete welfare, but the administrators don't understand that it's a priority to do some of the things that Lee and I were talking about with the coaches. That the coach development needs to be a priority if you expect to have a successful department or organization, and that needs to be a priority for you as an owner or, you know, as an administrator to help your coaches, because that there is still that mentality that all coaches do is coach. But there's so many other things that they're being pulled out to do, whether it's at the collegiate level, whether it's fundraising, you know, media. They need training too. And so making that a priority, if you're an owner or administrator, I think is crucial to your whole organization being successful.
Yeah.
We expect coaches to be expert people without giving them any training in it. It's just, right, you're a coach, you should know how to do this. It's crazy what we expect of them, isn't it, Helen?
I'm curious, Janice and Duncan, if you have example of organization of smaller size, maybe with more limited resources, who have been able to put in place a holistic approach and some supportive environment or education for coaches.
From a collegiate perspective, you know, I think this is that's a great question. But before I get to that, I want to comment on what Lee said in terms of communication and language. You know, I think in today's time, with the pressure that's on coaches, the idea of coaches training and development is being left out. And it's something that I don't know if it gets raised by the coaches themselves, but I always think about assistant coaches who probably get less training, and they are the people who are dealing directly, I think Helen would concur, with the athletes, right? But I think, you know, Miriam, when I think about college athletics and for Division II, for example, and Division III, and some of the Division I schools, the athletics departments that are more integrated into the campus culture and community itself, I tend to see those coaches and those athletics programs and athletes more integrated into wider services on the larger campus. So they're not as isolated. So mental health and wellness, or whatever, career development, career resources. I think there's more opportunity, there's more collaboration, perhaps in those settings and structures where, again, there's integration going on with similar units on the campus. It's like DEI. We're sitting on another conference yesterday and we were talking about DEI, you know, and how DEI affects everything that we do and not just one particular area. Well, you know, DEI in the college on the campus, similar to what we're talking about here, happens in different places. There's a person in the president's office that's doing DEI. There's a person in the athletics department that's doing DEI. Okay, and then there's somebody else who's doing DEI, and all these people are in these silos that Duncan pointed out and not really working together. So, you know, that would be my take on, and I like the idea too of coaches actually speaking up themselves. I mean, because in the end, ultimately, this is their job. Like I said, we're in a different day and time. All you have to do is look at all the incidents that are happening every single day in the news with coaches, right? From student athletes' reactions, examples that I mentioned earlier, all these things are impacting their job and, you know, in their ability to do their job. And so I think they, along with everybody else, has to speak up. But, you know, it's a new day and athletes are driving what's happening in their sports.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Doc said, at the professional level, in terms of what we're seeing where people are doing a good job. I mean, I would point to the WTA as a great example. I think they've done some phenomenal work with, you know, limited resources when you compare, you know, what some of the other major professional sports have. And I think the reason why they've been successful in doing more with less is because of the investment in research that they've made. They've done longitudinal studies on their athletes. They put together programs which have really emphasized the health and well-being of their players, and they've taken the data, they've shown it to the coaches, they've shown it to the players, they've shown it to the parents of the younger athletes, and they've done a phenomenal job of making this sort of wellness component piece based on hard science as part of their culture, and that's allowed them to do a lot more with less. Because people have bought into the culture that they've created, and they've created the data which backs it up. So I would really point to the WTA as a great example of a sport, and they're doing this globally, right? They're not just based in North America; they're doing it across the planet. So I think the WTA deserves a lot of credit for their approach, and I think it all stems from some real foresight around doing the work to get the research done, and then sharing it in a way that can be applied with the key constituents of their particular sporting environment.
Really interesting. Thank you for sharing about that example, because it seems that they're really doing a good job on that. I really like all what you had to share on the holistic approach, the support of the coaches, the athletes empowerment, and them kind of leading the way. We had a comment from someone yesterday in a panel saying that the athletes are now ahead of the industry, and that the organization are trying to play catch up behind them. Just wanted to hear if you have a comment on this, and if this is a thought that you share as well. And they were especially speaking for the collegiate world and the Olympic sport as well. And Janice, I don't know if this is something that you feel that you agree with.
I don't know. Could you sort of restate that into a question for me?
Yeah, absolutely. They were saying that do we think that this movement of athlete empowerment, do we think that it's ahead of the structural changes that need to happen to support those athletes?
I think absolutely. But when I say ahead, there are some things, sports is so reactionary. We react to everything. We react to incidents that happen. I mean, the whole George Floyd situation activated this conversation that activated the athletes. And actually, it was prior to George Floyd. Really, it was Colin Kaepernick, right? In 2016, where we began to see athletes being empowered. So were we having these conversations then, in our organizations, in our institutions, in our athletics departments, or we kind of sitting and waiting, to see what would happen? And then things began to snowball. So I would say, sort of as typical, we are reactionary in catching up. But I maintain that the horse has already left the gate, as they would say. The horse has already left the cart. There is no going back. There's just too much power, which is really, quite frankly, exciting for me to see from a leadership perspective. And what is this going to mean? And so, yes, I do think we have to catch up from an administrative perspective. And that's why it's so important now more than ever that we look at our challenges in athletics in a holistic sense, and that we understand that everything that we do impacts our business. It impacts the culture, the community that we live in. It impacts economically. I mean, we cannot deny the economic and social impact of sports at all levels. And so I think, if we do our heads in the sand, and you cannot be a successful organization today at any level by trying to catch up, but to the trends and what's been happening. And so I think it's not too late, but I think there are a lot of great minds out there that working together and utilizing folks like ourselves on this call is a great place to start.
That was a great summary, and actually we're going to end our panel on this. I want to thank you, all four of you, for your time, for joining us this morning. Pleasure to have you here and hear what you had to say. We have shared in the chat little bit about each one of you. Janice has also shared about her 360 model, and we'll be sharing with our participant in an email afterwards. I'm going to ask you guys to log off. Thank you so much for your time. And
Thanks very much.
Miriam.